let others wallow in Watergate. We are going to do our job. That is what President Nixon said to his staff in July 1973. And 13 months later, this happened.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
What schedule is the Trump presidency on? Is it on the 4-year schedule or the Nixon schedule? Joining us now, Frank Rich, writer-at-large for New York Magazine. He's also an executive producer of HBO's Veep. He is the writer of the New York Magazine cover story, How a Presidency Ends. Frank, I love this because those of us of a certain age who believe we remember have forgotten so much of the texture of how long different things took, the rhythms, when it felt like nothing was happening, when it suddenly felt like a lot was happening, and it's all here.
Well, thanks. You know, I think one reason why we misremember is the movie of All the President's Men. Woodward and Bernstein break the story, and then towards the end, you have that montage of all the resignations and events happening, and it seems like it happened in a snap. That quote that you read of Nixon's July of '73, by then, there had been 2 months of the now legendary Senate Watergate hearings. What did you know and when did you know it? Sam Ervin's hearings. John Mitchell, the Attorney General, had been indicted. There'd been one scandal after another. And yet even then, there was no sign Nixon was leaving office. He had only 22% told the Gallup poll that they thought he should get out. So it was another 13 months of further events. So we're around July of '73 now.
Yes.
And
yes.
Let's see what happens over the 13 months between now and late next summer.
You rely, as anyone must, on Elizabeth Drew, who wrote the Washington Journal. It was her collected dispatches of the whole Watergate investigation. And there's just wonderful quotes from Liz Drew's work here. And she's describing what the news cycle was like. You quote her saying, "The news is coming too fast, faster and harder than anyone expected. It's almost impossible to absorb." And she goes on about Spiro Agnew, the vice president, having to plead on charges of bribery and tax fraud. And she ends it by saying, at the end of the day, someone says, "It's like being drunk." And I read that, yes, that's what
it feels like now.
Yeah.
It feels like that now in a day of the internet, but it felt like that when there were just daily papers and the evening news. And so we have to, and with that comes a certain impatience. We feel that, you know, Watergate can be built in a day, that if Trump deserves to be removed from office or to be driven from office, which is what happened with Nixon, it should happen tomorrow or yesterday. But it doesn't work that way. And one reason it doesn't work that way is because of the Republicans. We have this fantasy now that Republicans back then were so much, the establishment, so much more noble than Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan. No, they were wusses too. They criticized Nixon very gently. They talked off the record or not for attribution to journalists, but they didn't get with the program until it was almost too late and Nixon was going to go anyway.
Yeah, you had to have smoking guns. You also point out that, let's remember, Nixon's support was actually bipartisan, because in those days we had Democratic senators from places like Mississippi and Alabama, and they were staunch Nixon supporters.
Exactly. Right now, people say, well, there's a Republican Congress that will protect Trump, where there was a Democratic Congress that could have taken out Nixon. But that's just apples and oranges, because actually the votes supporting Nixon included a lot of Democrats, Southern conservative Democrats, who would later migrate to the Republican Party, but had not yet.
So I mean, this is one of the things that really surprised me, and makes perfect sense when you read it here. You actually make the case that the party dynamics just aren't that different from what they were for Nixon, where we have been saying, gee, these Republicans are so weak compared to Barry Goldwater and those guys who told Nixon he had to leave, but they only told Nixon he had to leave literally when they heard the smoking gun tape.
And literally when there was already a letter of resignation written by Ray Price, excuse me, a statement of resignation on Nixon's desk. And so it was political theater when Barry Goldwater and the party elders went to the White House and said, it's time for you to go. He was packing his bags.
And there was talk, there was public speculation about resignation already in the media.
There was, and even so, he was such a quixotic personality in his way, as Trump is, that the family was pushing him to stay. There was, you know, they thought he could turn on a dime and change, but in the end, he realized he wouldn't win a trial in the Senate. But he never was impeached. People forget that, too. He left.
Got out before the vote. You make the point that Nixon much smarter than Trump and much less self-destructive publicly.
Right. I mean, one thing, Nixon was a lawyer. He was a crafty lawyer.
Yeah.
He used to lecture his own staff, the cover-up will always be worse than the crime, because when he had hounded Alger Hiss during the HUAC committees to get him out as a Soviet spy, accusing him of being a Soviet spy, he never got that conviction, but Hiss was convicted of the cover-up, if you will, perjury. So he knew all that. Trump doesn't even know the rule of law that he's violating.
Anyone who's telling you that impeachment is impossible or resignation is impossible or Trump will hang in there and last forever, you have got to read Frank Rich's cover story, How a Presidency Ends. It is really a stunning parallel to Watergate. Frank, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.